Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling one of those really frustrating problems that I think a lot of leaders face. It's that huge chasm between working incredibly hard, working 80-hour weeks, pouring everything you have into it, and then not seeing any real lasting, transformational change. And our sources for this deep dive suggest this gap isn't usually about a lack of intelligence or commitment. It's actually structural. Most leaders don't fail because their vision is bad. They fail because their influence stays, well, purely accidental. You know the feeling. You get this huge spike of momentum, everybody complies, but 6 months down the line, everything's just snapped right back. You're just exhausted, and the organization hasn't really changed.
And that feeling, that exhaustion without transformation, that's exactly what we want to get at today. The whole mission here is to move beyond just, managing the day-to-day activity and start cultivating a true, sustained legacy. The quiet truth is that leadership doesn't multiply just from good intentions. It multiplies when your impact becomes deliberate, when it's designed, when it's embedded in the systems and the people you're leading.
So let's define that shift right up front because it's critical. Transactional leadership asks a pretty limited question, right? It asks what needs to get done now.
Right. It's necessary but limited.
But transformational leadership asks something completely different. It's asking what has to change in our people, in our systems, in the culture, so that the results we want will just keep happening long after I'm gone. It's that shift from just doing the work to, well, designing an environment where the work thrives on its own. Okay, let's unpack this. This core problem of accidental influence. Our sources are, absolutely insistent on this point. Influence is not optional. You already have it. It's already at work. Think about it. Every single email, every conversation, it's shaping assumptions. Every tough call you make reinforces a set of values. Even your silence, your reaction to a crisis.
Right. That silence can be the loudest thing.
Yeah.
It teaches the team what really matters and, maybe more importantly, what can be ignored. Well, the problem really starts when leaders just treat their influence as neutral. Or they try to lead reactively, only jumping on problems as they pop up, just hoping their good intentions will sort of carry the day. But influence that's left to just drift, it's almost always going to reinforce the path of least resistance.
It just maintains the status quo.
Exactly, including all the broken patterns and inefficiencies that are already there. And what's fascinating here is that leaders often feel, a bit guilty about this, but they don't see it as a moral thing. But sources going back thousands of years, including ancient scripture, they don't treat influence as some neutral byproduct of your job title. They treat it as a sacred trust. The principle is just so clear.
Negligence is never neutral.
Never. If you misuse your influence, or even if you just fail to manage it, you are actively forming the people and the culture around you. You're just not doing it in a deliberate or productive way.
And that's the insight you really need to take away right now. You possess influence. So the question isn't if you have it. The question is whether you're exercising it with a kind of laser-like purpose, shaping a durable future, or if you're just letting it drift, letting the culture form itself around your blind spots and your own exhaustion. So if that's accidental influence, how do we start to counteract it? This brings us right to that classic distinction between transactional and transformational leadership.
Right.
Transactional leadership is sort of the necessary plumbing of any organization. It focuses on, clear exchanges, compliance, managing performance with rewards or consequences.
You need it.
You absolutely need it for order, for accountability, for just getting things done. It manages compliance.
But, and this is the big but transactional leadership, it rarely shapes identity. It's great for hitting this quarter's numbers, but it doesn't build that long-term resilience. Transformational leadership, on the other hand, it focuses squarely on identity, on values, on purpose. It's working at a much deeper level. It's trying to reshape how people fundamentally think, what they believe is possible.
And how they see their part in the bigger story.
Exactly. That's how you cultivate real conviction and ownership.
Okay, but let's get practical here. If transformational is so much better, why do so many of us default back to the transactional model, especially when the pressure is on?
That's a great question. And the sources point to two main things, really: fear and speed. Transactional leadership gives you quick, quantifiable results. The compliance is instant.
You can see it on a spreadsheet.
You can see it immediately. Transformational leadership, though, that takes immense time. It takes patience. It takes risk. You're asking people to fundamentally change their beliefs. And it is so hard to survive that short-term pressure for transactional results when you're making this big bet on long-term transformation. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really addresses the true hierarchy of how an organization works. So you have performance on top,
Yeah.
but beneath performance sits culture,
Okay.
and beneath culture sits belief.
Yeah.
Transactional leadership only ever manages that top layer, the performance. Transformational leadership goes all the way down. It tries to renew the whole system by challenging those underlying beliefs and really reforming the organization's purpose.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. How this transformation actually spreads. The moment a leader starts acting with that kind of intention, the culture itself becomes the multiplier.
Yes.
It's the shared meaning in the community. Our sources say there's no such thing as influence without formation, and culture is the engine of that formation.
Exactly. And that formation process is, well, it's pretty predictable. What leaders consistently model, how they act in a crisis, what they reward publicly, and maybe most crucially, what they choose to tolerate. All of that becomes deeply embedded.
It becomes the unwritten rules.
The unwritten rules. Over time, those observed values, they harden into norms, and then those norms solidify into the systems, the processes, the actual reality that keeps those original values going, for better or for worse.
And this leads us to that really powerful analogy of the gardener versus the engineer. An engineer sees a problem, applies a decisive, forced fix. But a gardener understands the limits of force.
A gardener can't force a seed to sprout overnight. It's just not possible. But what they can do is cultivate the conditions where growth becomes almost inevitable. They focus on the soil, on the environment, on removing whatever is limiting growth.
So if we apply that,
Yeah.
what does healthy soil actually look like in, say, a modern organization? And what are the weeds a transformational leader has to pull?
Well, healthy soil is things like psychological safety, real transparency, trust. It's the conditions where people feel safe enough to take a risk, to fail, to innovate.
And the weeds.
The weeds are all those little negative norms that just get tolerated. The chronic sarcasm in meetings, the lack of follow-up, the silent acceptance that burnout is just the price of admission.
Right.
A transactional leader is only looking at the yield, the outcome. The transformational gardener is obsessed with the health of the whole ecosystem because they know that forcing growth always leads to a brittle collapse down the road.
And this brings us back to that moral critique of negligence. When injustice or unfairness or just shoddy work is overlooked, when we tolerate mediocrity, it becomes normal.
It gets normalized.
The shadow a leader casts, the visible pattern of their character and priorities. That defines the culture long before any formal policy does. If you want to know what a leader truly values, you just have to look at what they consistently walk past and say nothing about. So to make this less abstract, let's dive into a case study from our sources. Joseph. His story is kind of the ultimate example of intentional influence, and often without any formal authority to start. His own transformation was so gradual, his genius was honed in obscurity, in a pit, in a prison, not when he suddenly got promoted.
What really defines Joseph's leadership is this deep commitment to stewardship over ownership. When he's finally standing in front of Pharaoh, he doesn't take credit. He doesn't act entitled to his insight. He immediately frames his authority as a responsibility. He says, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer."
Wow.
He just got it. He understood that his competence was a resource to be used for a purpose bigger than himself.
And the result of that mindset was this incredibly enduring legacy. His impact wasn't just managerial, it was truly architectural. He didn't just manage the crisis in front of him, he transformed the fundamental systems of an entire nation.
Yeah, let's get specific. He designed durable grain storage and distribution networks. And these things had to last for a 7-year famine.
So this wasn't just infrastructure.
No, it was systemic design. He put fair processes in place to make sure that grain was gathered and then distributed responsibly, not just to the powerful, but to sustain neighboring nations, including, his own family who had betrayed him. He fundamentally transformed Egypt's logistics and its governance.
He rebuilt the whole supply chain, basically. So the core lesson for you, as you're listening, is this. Competence, your skills, your knowledge, that opens the door. But it's character, your integrity, your sense of fairness, your discernment, that's what sustains the systems and makes sure the impact actually lasts.
That's it. True leadership leaves systems structurally improved, lives protected, and whole communities equipped for resilience, not just managed for 7 tough years.
So what does this all mean for us today? Sitting at our desks right now, let's transition to some practical steps. If the ultimate test of leadership isn't how indispensable you are, but how resilient the culture is in your absence, What should we be doing?
Well, first, we have to address the major threat to all of this, which is burnout. Our sources are really clear. Burnout is almost always a failure of structured rhythm, not a lack of devotion.
That's a powerful distinction.
It is. Sustainable leadership demands intentional rhythms of rest, reflection, and delegation. When you prioritize health and time away, you are modeling for your entire team that you value longevity just as much as you value those immediate unsustainable results.
And that longevity is the foundation for multiplication. True influence has to be generative. It's measured not by your personal presence or how full your calendar is, but by what persists and grows when you finally step away.
And that completely changes how we should think about delegation. It cannot be just dumping tasks on people. Delegation, in this transformational model, it has to be seen as a form of discipleship. You're equipping others with both competence and character. Just like those historical examples, Paul mentoring Timothy, preparing him to carry the mission forward without relying on the founder's presence.
Which brings us to a really useful framework for taking action, something our sources call the impact mapping template. It forces leaders to focus their intention across 4 dimensions of influence at the same time, moving beyond just, the quarterly numbers. So the first dimension is people affected. This asks, are they being empowered and equipped? Or are they just being used as a resource to execute your plan?
And this dimension asks you to look beyond just skill development. Are they growing in ownership, in confidence? If they can only follow your plan perfectly, you've succeeded transactionally. If they can innovate and lead without you, that's when you've succeeded transformationally.
The second dimension is systems influenced. Joseph proved this point perfectly. Are your structures designed just to function day to day, or are they intentionally built for long-term sustainability and for fairness?
Right, this is where you check for structural integrity. Are your meeting rhythms designed just to extract information, or are they set up to actually foster collaboration? Are your hiring systems built to keep the current team comfortable or to bring in diverse, future-ready talent? Your systems need to be durable, fair, and scalable.
Okay, third dimension, values reinforced. Are you just talking about values on a plaque on the wall, or is the actual lived culture aligned with those non-negotiable principles?
When the sources talk about kingdom principles, they're really talking about universal metrics. Things like justice, equity, humility. And it doesn't matter what your context is, a nonprofit, a tech startup, this means radical transparency, making sure resources are allocated fairly, and making decisions that prioritize the mission over any one person's ego. It's that commitment to doing the right thing even when it's not the most efficient thing.
And finally, the fourth dimension, outcome sustained. This is the legacy check. Will the results last long after you're gone?
If the project falls apart the second you leave the room, then the outcome was accidental and temporary. But if the team keeps producing excellent results using the very systems and strength and character you left behind, then the outcome was designed. It was transformational. It forces you to always build for resilience, not for dependence on your personal oversight.
And that is the essential challenge that all our sources reiterate. Transformational impact requires disciplined, focused intentionality. We have to move from leading an unexamined life to embracing intentional stewardship. You can't be everywhere at once, but you can be intentional in one strategic place that really matters.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought to take with you. What if your leadership isn't just meant to preserve the systems that exist today, but to radically redefine what is even possible for the people and the systems you lead tomorrow?
So we challenge you to make that commitment now. Identify just one strategic place, a specific team, a key system you own, maybe even just one crucial relationship where meaningful transformation can start right away. Take those 4 dimensions of the impact map and turn this insight into a focused, deliberate 30-day influence plan. Start small, but start with intention.
Because the leadership that truly outlives you is architectural, it's principled, and it's redemptive. And it's ultimately measured not in personal accolades or the title you held, but in the flourishing and enduring resilience of those you served.
Yeah.
And the durable systems you helped shape. That is the true legacy of transformation.